Great show coming up for you on American Black Journal. We've teamed up with BridgeDetroit for a closer look at the affordable housing crisis in our city. We have special guests joining us for a roundtable on the challenges of finding quality housing and the impact on homelessness in the city. Plus, we'll examine potential solutions. You don't want to miss today's show, so stay where you are. American Black Journal starts right now.
From Delta faucets to Behr paint, Masco Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. Masco, serving Michigan communities since 1929. Support also provided by the Cynthia and Edsel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV.
The DTE Foundation proudly supports 50 years of American Black Journal in covering African American history, culture, and politics. The DTE Foundation and American Black Journal partners in presenting African American perspectives about our communities and in our world.
Also brought to you by Nissan Foundation and viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to American Black Journal. I'm your host, Stephen Henderson. Today, we partner with BridgeDetroit for an in-depth look at the shortage of affordable housing options in the city. For a lot of people, that can mean the difference between having a home of their own or living in a homeless shelter. BridgeDetroit and Detroit Free Press reporter Nushrat Rahman has the story of one woman's journey to find quality housing after a family tragedy left her homeless.
I got married in September 2021 to my husband, Danny. We've been together for 8 years. And in January of 2022, I lost him to complications of COVID. And when I lost him, I lost everything. So in losing everything, I found myself losing my home, the business, him, and found myself homeless.
That's Tonya Hogan. She's someone who, for the first time in her life, is without a home. She's also among the growing number of women and families who are experiencing housing instability in Detroit.
We start seeing more family calling and saying that they need more shelters. I can say in the last 2 weeks, we got at least 9 calls for family who are big families. So we're talking about 4 children, mother, or 4 children and a father who needs shelters. It is hard to accommodate such population unless if you are equipped for it with apartments.
That's because of a combination of multiple factors, including the end of pandemic-era moratoriums on evictions, the shortage of affordable housing, and difficulties using housing choice vouchers, also known as Section 8. Audi said his organization's shelters are full.
The bottom line is we don't have enough housing, and we're not addressing the cause of homelessness. We're just patching the problem.
Any one thing can lead to a displacement, a past due medical bill, a couple past due rent payments, rent payment can lead directly to homelessness because people do not have the savings and the economic mobility to sort of get past those incidents. And so what happens is certain housing emergencies end up resulting in homelessness for families.
Hogan stayed at the Salvation Army's Booth Services Shelter in Detroit for more than a year.
That first week was terrifying, and I went through a lot of emotions. I suffer from depression and anxiety, so I didn't have time to grieve. So that first week, I literally stayed in my room. I slept, I cried, I was tired. I had no appetite.
And before that, you kind of told me how you were living out of your car for a little bit. I mean, what was that experience like for you?
It was scary. Yeah, it was scary, but I parked at I parked in the parking lot at Motor City Casino
Yeah.
because I knew that one, they had security,
Yeah.
and it was a place that my husband and I visit a lot, so I knew that I'll feel kind of comfortable and safe there. And,
After Tonya entered shelter, she got onto the wait list for the Housing Choice Voucher Program. It's a federal program that can help people pay for their rent by covering a portion of it. It's meant to curb homelessness and poverty, but it's difficult to use. After applying, the average wait to receive the voucher is about 2 years. Only a fraction of eligible families across the country get accepted. Then they have to find a place, but often they're confronted with a shortage of affordable units, and it can be challenging to find landlords with quality housing who accept the vouchers.
Because of the pandemic, a lot of homeowners decided not to accept the Section 8 anymore. A lot of landlords with the buildings decided not to do Section 8 anymore. So it's kind of scarce.
Everybody's floating around in the same pool trying to get to the same properties. So it's limited. It's not always something available.
I almost felt like the system was setting me up to fail, because it was like, how can you say, okay, go out there and find your place, but there's nothing really out there.
In total, there is not enough housing stock for affordable housing. So there is a waiting list even if you have the vouchers. There is not homes. And then they will continue to wait in the shelter.
Bowser pointed to city programs like Code Blue, where staffers connect people experiencing housing emergencies with hotel stays and case managers. Detroiters can also now call a new hotline connecting them to a city-led coalition of housing service providers.
What case management does and what that housing resource helpline does, it kind of centralizes those resources so that you don't have to go to 5 or 6 different organizations to achieve, to get help.
After more than a year, Hogan is now in her own apartment outside of Detroit.
It's kind of bittersweet. It's sweet because now I'm not in a shelter. I have a place I can call home, but being by myself, I still find myself grieving. I find it hard to cook for one.
Homelessness doesn't have a face directly. People hear homelessness and think drugs, think, wayward activity, but that's not always the case. Homelessness is a result of life being life. Sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down.
When I would tell people that I'm living in a shelter, the first thing that they'll do is they'll kind of give me a crazy look, as if I screwed over my finances, or what kind of drugs are you on, or, that's the misconception. You have veterans who are in a homeless shelter because their finances is not enough, or their benefits are not enough, or that they're dealing with health issues. You have mothers in there with their kids because they were evicted because they didn't have the finances to continue paying for rent, or I would hear stories of the landlords upping the rent and they can no longer afford it. For the most part, I just want to be able to sustain myself, be independent, just be happy, and and be able to travel and just enjoy life. I want to be happy again.
We convened a roundtable on the state of homelessness in the city and the urgent need for affordable housing. Here's my conversation with BridgeDetroit's Nushrat Rahman, the City of Detroit's Group Executive for Housing Planning and Development, Donald Rencher, and Linda Little, who is CEO of the Neighborhood Service Organization. So Nushrat, I want to start with you, because the piece that you've done about this, the conversation you had, I think illuminates this issue in such a critical and personal way. Tell us about Tonya.
We met Tonya when a photojournalist and I over at the Free Press were working on a story about the Housing Choice Voucher Program and how difficult it is to navigate that program, especially for those who are trying to exit out of homelessness. She was in the middle of, she had just gotten her voucher and she was right at the beginning of finding a place. And so we decided that we would follow along on her journey just to illustrate any challenges that she would face and what that experience was like. Throughout the course of that, the several months that we've been with her, we learned about her journey, how she got into homelessness, and the challenges that she's experienced since then. Tonya is someone who, I think the main reflections that I've learned throughout this experience is that homelessness in the city is not a monolith. There isn't a one-size-fit-all model, I guess, for lack of a better word, of what homelessness looks like in the city. Tonya's story is this. She's someone who suffered an economic challenge. Last year, her husband died from complications from COVID-19. He was the sole breadwinner. After that, she lost her home. She lost not only her husband, but her home, and then she entered into shelter. One economic financial challenge set off this cascade of other financial challenges in her life. She's someone who's looking for housing while there's a shortage of affordable housing, while she doesn't have an income coming in, and while she's coming up against landlords who aren't willing to rent out to her.
Yeah. So Nushrat, talk about a little of the reasons it's hard to maintain the amount of affordable housing we need, and hard for people who need it to access it.
One of the challenges, and I'm talking specifically about people who are experiencing homelessness, so they're in the homeless shelters. The challenges that they've told me is that, they have the voucher in hand, but as they're setting out to find a place, it has to fit within the certain budget. It has to meet certain requirements, but what they're confronting is not being able to find places that fits within that budget. So it falls outside of that scope. But also quality units, right? Last year, we did a story, like I mentioned, about the voucher program. One of the women that we featured, she said she came across places in Detroit. Some didn't have porches, some didn't have windows. And so you have the voucher in hand that's able to subsidize your rent, but you can't find anything in the city.
Linda, this is, I see you nodding as she's talking, and I know it's a nod of knowledge and familiarity with this experience. Talk about what you see at NSO every day, not with just one person, but with many, many folks.
Yes. So what Nushrat has expressed is absolutely correct in what we see every day. We have many Tonyas, and it is not a monolith why people end up homeless. But I will add this point of context, that poverty is the root cause of homelessness. If Tonya had resources, because wealthy people have their breadwinners die every day, they suffer life challenges every day, but they don't end up homeless. So without resources, people without those resources end up being homeless. Housing instability. So housing instability is not, it's multifactorial. I just want to point that out. But there are Tonyas, all over the place. Yeah. And there are people who work. Tonya may have a job, but her employment circumstance does not allow for her to pay $1,500, $1,600 a month for rent, which is the going price for rental units today. At NSO, we contract with landlords to help people get into rapid rehousing. And over the last 3 years, those contracts with those landlords have diminished because they want market rates, because the market is demanding, double, triple what we're used to paying. Mm-hmm. And so we are having trouble with placing our clients that we have traditionally not had an issue at all with placing. But I really want for your viewers to understand that homelessness is so much more than, the people that stand on the corner. Mm-hmm. That's a very small subset of the homeless population, by the way.
Yeah.
And it is something that affects all of us. I have had friends who have encountered homelessness at a certain point in their lives, and people that we see in the grocery store, people that we might walk by, down the street, at work. There are people who go to work every day and sleep in their cars or they're couch surfing because they cannot afford stable housing. So this is a major issue. And I'm glad that you're raising this topic so that we can bring it to the forefront and help create some innovative solutions.
Yeah. So I know that at NSO, you're focused on both issues, right? The emergent issue that people have if they don't have housing or if they find themselves without housing, but then also what you're talking about in terms of bringing some stability to their lives so that they don't find themselves there again. It really is doing two very different things. I mean, they are very different tasks. They require different kinds of resources and focus. Talk about how that works in a city like Detroit.
So we believe and adopt HUD's premise of housing first. So you get people housed first. You get them that stable environment, and then you can address the other issues, which sometimes include their healthcare needs, physical and behavioral health. There may be some social issues that are going up. Maybe there, is a need for a guardian. Maybe there's some other issues that need to be addressed before you can even focus on employment, let's say. Maybe they're not employable. Maybe they're, disabled, permanently disabled. So we help them get that disability income. So whatever it is that we can do to help provide a sustainable solution to maintain that housing is what we strive to do at NSO, addressing the needs of that whole person. It's a very person-centered approach. So you'd have to have these different modalities to offer solutions that help meet the needs of that individual. And that's what we do at NSO.
Yeah. Donald, I want to bring you into the conversation here, both to talk about, from the city's perspective, the challenge that we face in terms of, people finding themselves homeless, but then also this question of affordable housing more generally, and how the city approaches the question of making sure that there is enough affordable housing for folks.
So thank you again for inviting me on the show. I appreciate it. Work with Linda a lot, and she is one of our champions. And I was the housing director for about 2 years, 2018 to 2020, mid to 2020. And I think the question I got the most was like, how can I find an affordable housing unit? It was like the question that I've received all the time. And I remember at the time answering that question and saying, I really am not a real estate broker or in the business of doing that. But I'm trying to ensure that we intervene by providing policies and building more affordable housing units. But I can tell you that we're not going to be able to build enough units quick enough and fast enough to solve the issue. And so it really is going to come with real policy change. And so I can tell you, when I look at affordable housing, it just means to me 30% of your income is being spent on your housing expenses. No matter how much your income is, you can be it can be challenging to meet your housing conditions. And so, as Linda said previously, this is a poverty issue, and I find it the large challenge is working with the group of folks that Nushrat actually alluded to at the beginning, are the people who don't have the resources you need to find housing units. Now, housing choice vouchers, in this particular situation with the woman that you discussed previously, I think honestly she was one of the lucky ones to get a voucher, because it's not unlimited resources, because it's really hard just to get that. And once you get that, it's really difficult to actually find a unit, right? And so I am proud of the fact that the mayor saw this fact, and we built out a housing services team. It's 60 folks, and their job every day is to find actual housing units. And these housing units are not necessarily government sponsored or funded. They're regular housing units that are in areas of, I would say, low market areas that can actually take rental value that are comparable to very low income housing units. And we're trying to find really good units, and we found upwards to at least 1,000 in our pipeline. And we have a number that people can call. We've made the number available for people who are facing eviction. And so we encourage people to give out the number. I can give out the number before we get off today, but we're really trying to connect to housing opportunities outside of just building units, because we're building units very quickly. We've built around 300 permanent supportive housing windows, one of the ones that we've been able to put in place, and I think we're going to do 250 more in the next 3 years, but it's not going to necessarily solve the issue, right?
Yeah.
And so we really need to figure out how to get people the resources they need and the financial wherewithals to get them in place of strength where they can live on a daily basis.
Yeah. So let's also talk about the condition of some of the housing that people find themselves in. I mean, we hear a lot about people not being able to find suitable housing, even if it is affordable. It's just not. It's not suitable for someone to live in. What can the city do, and what is the city doing about that?
So two things, and I don't necessarily expect folks who already don't have real access to resources to also go find a unit too. But again, like I said, we can give the number out, but we are challenging landlords to fix their units and get them to a place before they're able to rent it to a quality and level which makes it rentable. But that's also usually a financial exercise too, right? Mm-hmm. If I have to spend a bunch of money to make my unit nice, right? I'm going to try to see to make sure that I'm going to have to increase the rent of that particular unit. And so one of the things that, as far as the policy change that we're looking at, the state of Michigan just passed a law that allowed municipalities to provide what we call pilots, payment in lieu of taxes. It's something that every affordable housing developer receives as an incentive to bring affordable housing, but the regular Joe Blow does not receive this tax incentive, and we want to change that actual ordinance in the city of Detroit to allow a tax incentive if you are going to provide affordable housing units at quality standards. And that's one thing that we're working on right now to increase the ability for people to find accessible units that are quality.
Yeah. Go ahead and give that phone number just so that we'll also put it on our website and
sure.
It otherwise, but tell people what number they can call.
866-313-2520. Now is the number, and you get connected to someone, and we'll help you try to define that and locate that unit. And we've received over 10,000 calls to try to help people navigate this space, and it's been going. So we encourage people to actually make that call.
So I want to quickly have you guys respond to the environment that we're in and the evictions, the rental evictions that were on a moratorium during the pandemic. When that restarts, of course, we're going to have a bigger problem. Nushrat, talk just a little about how that's going to affect the folks who find themselves in this situation.
Yeah, so I can break down the numbers of what evictions are looking like in the city. So the number in 36th District Court, which covers the city of Detroit, the number of eviction cases against tenants is approaching pre-pandemic levels. Mm-hmm. So that's surpassing 23,000 filings last year alone. Before that, in 2019, it was I believe it was like almost 30,000 filings. So we're creeping back up there. During the pandemic, that went down to the thousands, right? The thousands. And so that's approaching back to those pre-pandemic numbers. During the first 4 months of this year, judges in Detroit's 36th District Court signed more than 1,800 eviction orders. So that is that final, yes, that an eviction can happen. That's a 136% jump compared to the same time period last year. And so we're definitely seeing an increase in evictions, and that's kind of going to play into the landscape that we're talking about right now.
Finally, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the passing of a Detroit trailblazer, Reverend Dr. Joanne Watson. We here at American Black Journal and Detroit Public Television want to offer our sincere condolences to her family, her friends, and her colleagues. She will forever be remembered for her work over the years as a civil rights activist, a Detroit City Councilwoman, head of the Detroit NAACP, the first woman to do that, a radio host, and a minister. She was also a close friend of this show, and we had conversations about the 1963 Walk to Freedom, about reparations for African Americans, women in the Black church, or the 1967 rebellion. We could always count on Joanne to be an integral part of those important discussions. Her loss is profound for me, for this show, and for the city of Detroit. She was a tireless fighter for racial and social justice, and she will be missed tremendously. Rest well, Reverend Watson. That's going to do it for this week's show, which was produced in partnership with BridgeDetroit. You can find out more about today's guests at AmericanBlackJournal.org, and you can always connect with us anytime on Facebook and on Twitter. Take care, and we'll see you next time.
From Delta faucets to Behr paint, Masco Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. Masco, serving Michigan communities since 1929. Support also provided by the Cynthia and Edsel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV.
The DTE Foundation proudly supports 50 years of American Black Journal in covering African American history, culture, and politics. The DTE Foundation and American Black Journal partners in presenting African American perspectives about our communities and in our world.
Also brought to you by Nissan Foundation and viewers like you. Thank you.